Hey guys, it's Kevin again, finally here to review the 4th season of Better Call Saul. And what this season is essentially about is, as we know, after the events of season 3, Jimmy's, older brother Chuck did in fact commit suicide. We find out very early on in the season, and basically the rest of this season is Jimmy basically trying to deal with that, but also how this really starts to impact everything around him, while also consequently we see Mike starts to get in much deeper with Gus as well as Nacho, and we see how that starts to deteriorate some things in his life as he becomes closer to the Mike the Cleaner that we met in Breaking Bad, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, yeah, it's taken me a very long time to get through this season. As you guys know, 2018 was a really bad year for me in terms of TV shows. I watched, like, nothing. I don't know what happened, but even the shows I adored, I barely watched. And Better Call Saul was one that I did have the intention on finishing. I watched the first 2 episodes, really loved what I saw. I just was never able to catch up until now. I figured, though, now that I've seen all of Breaking Bad, which if you guys saw my last video, you know that is the case, not only is it a perfect time for me to get back into Better Call Saul, but I will have a bigger appreciation for it than ever, because now I have a little bit more context into who these characters are going to eventually become. And I think that's something that I'm, very happy, honestly, that that's something I went into this season with, because look, I'll say this right now. After the highs of seasons 2 and 3, is this season as good as that? No, but this is still an amazing season for sure that comes pretty damn close to what we did get. It's absolutely the most, I think, depressing and really just morose season of the entire show. We're just getting to right now. So, of course, one of the things that has always been a standout when it comes to Better Call Saul is, of course, the cast here, and that is no different this season. But I really do think that this season especially is some of the best acting we've ever had in this show, particularly from Bob Odenkirk, because he's playing a far more different side of Jimmy than we've seen. Now, the Jimmy in previous seasons, yes, he's always had this sort of sleazy side to him, but he really leans into that pretty heavily here. Jimmy this season comes off very disingenuous and almost completely just, detached from his emotions. And you really do see that throughout this entire season. He's much more closed off and things like that. And I just thought Odenkirk did such a incredible job with that here, especially in the back half of the season. He has this one monologue that is amongst his best acting in this entire show, and he just continues to impress the hell out of me. Everything he's doing such an incredible job with. And same goes for Jonathan Banks, who I have to say maybe gives his best performance of, no, I wouldn't say the entire show, but definitely one of his best performances as this character, because Mike is going through a lot this season. I don't want to get into a lot of what his main sort of dilemma is, but he has to do it in a very subtle way, and it takes a great actor to do that. And Jonathan Banks is always an actor that's been at the top of his game. He's always been a high caliber actor, but this really does show just how great of an actor he is with the type of acting he's doing here. It's very subtle, but he does such a excellent job with that here. And again, something the show has always done an excellent job is showing how both of these characters get closer to their Breaking Bad selves, and we really do see that this season more than ever. And then Rhea Seehorn is another actress that always delivers for me. I've always loved everything that she's done as the character of Kim, and same goes for this season. Kim is honestly in a pretty heartbreaking spot because she cares for Jimmy, but at the same time, things are not really going great for that relationship. They're in much different places. Jimmy starts becoming much more of a burden to her in that way, and you really are seeing how this is affecting Kim and her everyday struggle. And I thought Seehorn just did such a fantastic job in this role. As usual, I really loved what she ended up doing here. Rest of the cast also is fantastic. Patrick Fabian is always great as Howard Hamlin. Michael Mando as Nacho, really great acting all across the board. Giancarlo Esposito as Gus, always amazing in this show, and especially this season. I mean, yes, season 3, he had some amazing moments, but this season, you really do play into that more menacing side of Gus, the Gus that always makes sure things go his way, and again, he hasn't missed a beat, and I think that's something that this show has proven very well, is that you can have actors walk away from their roles a little bit, but just because they walk away, it does not always mean that they're not going to be back on their A game. I mean, that's something that's a rarity, but it seems like in both this and El Camino, that's something that we've noticed, is that these actors haven't played these roles for a while, but they did not at all forget just how great they were here. They still are very much delivering, and that is fantastic to see for sure. Alright, so now we're going to get into the directing and the writing for this season, which again, Vince Gilligan, I mean, I think I've praised this man enough. He's one of the best out there right now. So, of course, you're expecting some really great directing, but what I think he does really well this season is how, yes, the fun elements of the show are still very much there. I don't think Better Call Saul would be itself without it. It's always had a more sort of comedic side to it. There are definitely some really great comedic moments throughout the season, but this season leans far more heavily into the darker elements, and Gilligan just fucking nails it this season. This season is very hopeless throughout it. There's not a lot of happiness going on here. It's a very depressing season, and I really do think Gilligan did a really good job directing that, because when you're, directing a show that is far lighter in tone, I wouldn't say it's a lot lighter than Breaking Bad, because it definitely has always had a darker edge to it, that Breaking Bad, of course, had. But when your show has been not nearly as dark as it is now, it can be hard to transition into that. But Gilligan really has never had a problem with something like that, and I thought he did a really good job with directing this season. The writing, though, this season is really, really fantastic as well. There's so much that this season does really well in terms of writing, especially because at this point we know a lot about these characters, but we also established that this season very much feels like the second phase of the show. Chuck's death was, I would say, the end of the first act of the show. If you're dividing the show into 3 acts, this is the second act. This is very much what starts to transition Jimmy further into what we know him as. And what I mean by that is Chuck committing suicide and the impact that it has on Jimmy really begins the second phase of the show. And this is the phase that is a lot darker for sure. Jimmy as a character is kind of in a place this season where he feels stuck. As we know, at the end of season 3, he lost the ability to be an attorney. He completely lost that license. And so because of that, he feels very much trapped throughout this season, and you're kind of wondering, how is he really going to be able to get out of this? And it's a really interesting place to see Jimmy in, because we know how important being a lawyer is to him. We know how much he loves being an attorney, and so the fact that he has completely lost that ability, it presents a very different avenue for the character, and I thought they explored that very well this season. And then someone like Kim, who is continuing to thrive and is continuing to grow and has to continue to do this stuff without Jimmy, it really starts to show the disconnect between these two. These two are not in a very good place, and granted, they were not in a great place at the end of season 3. If Kim had not gotten into that car accident, I really do feel that these two probably would have ended things after the end of season 3, but because Kim, of course, is injured throughout a bunch of this season and has that very, she has like this arm injury and things like that. It is what is tying them together, and we very much do see how their relationship is also very much deteriorating throughout the season. And again, it's stuff that is hard to watch for sure. It's not exactly a very uplifting watch, but it's all things that the show has been setting up, and I think the season really starts to delve into that stuff very well here. But the other thing I love about this season is that even though Chuck is obviously dead in the show, like I said, very early on from the first scene, we realized that he did in fact commit suicide. There was no question about it whatsoever. His spirit still looms throughout the entire season. The impact that he had on Jimmy. Jimmy is reflecting a lot on their relationship. There's quite a few flashbacks that we do actually see of them, and it gives us some context into what their relationship really was like, because we've seen it in the present, but we focus far more on before Chuck started to become so obsessed with, like, you know, all the space blanket stuff and things like that, when he was actually thriving as a lawyer. And I thought they did a really good job with that throughout the season, because it shows, you know, how their relationship always was. And it was not a healthy one. I'll get more into that in the spoilers, but this is not at all a healthy relationship. And so because of that, you can very much see why this is having the effect it does on Jimmy. And Jimmy as a character is very much starting to go in the Walter White type direction. And that's when people say that Better Call Saul is becoming Breaking Bad. I feel like that's what they're really referring to, because we really start to see this season, while Jimmy McGill is someone that we have very much sympathized with, a character that we very much come to love, he's really starting to go in a very sleazy type direction, and we really do see more of that throughout the season. And he's always been someone that finds a way to weasel out of situations, but more than ever this season, he is not really doing things by the book anymore. And I thought that was something that was really well done within this season. It's just how rogue Jimmy is, you know, the path that he's going, where he's really becoming as a character. And again, I'll get more into that when I talk about, you know, everything goes down, like the finale and things like that. But I thought they did a really good job with that throughout the season. And I think character-wise, I mean, this is really when Jimmy is becoming closer and closer to Saul Goodman more than ever, and I thought that was really well handled. And same goes for Mike this season. We really start to see how Mike is going from someone that was very dissatisfied in his job, you know, has a lot of grief about his son and things like that, and now is starting to become much more of someone just that is subservient to Gus. And especially when it comes to his plotline this season, it involves him working with a bunch of people, basically putting the finishing touches on the lab that Jesse and Walt are eventually going to work in. And you see a lot of the interworkings of that, but also the complications that Mike really did have there. And I thought they did a really good job with exploring him throughout the season. A lot of people have been saying, like, why are we still seeing Mike on the show? How is this going to connect eventually? And I think it's because Mike and Jimmy are going in very similar directions with where their characters are. And what I mean is they're both going down a very dark path. They're both making some really tough decisions that is going to make them become the characters that we do see them eventually become in Breaking Bad. And I think that's something that they explored very well this season. So again, I think the writing is very strong here. There's a lot to really love about it. There's a lot of reflecting on things and things like that. And I just think the writing is very strong this season. As always, though, cinematography when it comes to the show is always top-notch, and no different this season. And they really do play around with that stuff, as they always do, but I think especially this season, there's a lot of really great montages that go on and things like that. One involving Jimmy and Kim that I thought was just absolutely masterful. It's without a doubt one of the best cold opens we've ever had in this show, and I thought they went all out with that. And just the way the camera moves, the certain things they choose to show, I mean, it's just absolute perfection when it comes to cinematography, and that's no different this season. Score, as always, is great as well, and the editing, I will say, if you were expecting this season to be as fast-paced as seasons 2 or 3, because there was so much going on within those seasons, season 3 especially, such a eventful season in that way, this season is far more slow-paced. There's a lot of, you know, characters lingering on things. There's a lot of just characters having conversations, but I found every second of it very riveting because of how much we've come to love these characters, because of how much we understand their plight. We get why Jimmy is stuck where he is. We get why him and Kim don't really have a great relationship at the moment. We get why Mike is, stuck where he is. We understand who these characters are, and so I thought they did a really good job with that throughout the season, and especially the way things wrap up. Holy shit, I cannot wait for Season 5, and I'm glad that I don't have to wait very long at all. I'm glad that I can just watch Season 5 immediately when I'm done with this review, because the way things end, I mean, look, this show might not have Breaking Bad level cliffhangers, but they still know how to end a season, and every single season of the show has always ended in a very depressing way. This just might be the most depressing ending yet. I do think Season 3 is the most shocking ending for sure, but this season I think definitely has the most depressing ending out of any of them for sure, and I don't think they could have handled that any better. So, really with this season, I mean, there's so much I'm loving about it, and when you have a show that is just this rich in characterization and texture and things like that, it's very hard to find a flaw, but I do think there is one that does bring this season down just slightly from seasons 2 and 3, and that's the character of Howard Hamlin, and not so much the character. I've always liked the character, I thought they've done a good job with him, and this season, definitely, he is in the most different place he's been, because he's not really at the top. He is blaming himself for Chuck's death. He really feels like he's the one that caused all this to happen. Like, he is the main catalyst that made Chuck do what he decided to do in the end, and why Chuck decided to, light that gas lamp and all that kind of stuff. I thought they did a good job with that in some episodes. There's a really great scene in episode 1 where you can really see how he is taking the blame for everything that happened to Chuck, and there's a really great scene with him and Jimmy in a bathroom. But overall, I just felt that the character was a bit underwritten. I felt like this arc we could have gotten a little bit more to, and maybe they'll get more into it in Season 5. I don't know. I haven't watched Season 5 yet, obviously. But as of right now, I just felt that they could have done a little bit more with this character, and I just felt that Howard could have, he's definitely the most interesting he's been in terms of how he is as a character, and the fact that he doesn't have Chuck anymore, who at points seemed more like a brother to him than than to Jimmy, really. I mean, Chuck and Howard had such a interesting relationship in that way, and I felt like they could have dived into that more this season, and they really didn't. But really, other than that, there's not really a lot to complain about here. There's so much that this season does right that it barely is even that much of a flaw, honestly. Okay, so with all that said, now we're going to delve into spoilers, because it's hard to talk about what's really going down this season without that, so we're just going to dive right into it. So I think I'm going to leave the Jimmy and Kim stuff last, because I want to talk about everything else that went on this season. Let's first start off talking about Gus, because Gus is a very interesting character to bring into the show. We know where Gus is going to go. We know how just menacing and threatening Gus is, and we did see that in Season 3, but Season 3 was far more, I think, about Gus just trying to wrap all these characters around his finger. That's exactly where he is with Nacho right now, and that's exactly where he's starting to become with Mike. And the one scene that I think sums that up better than ever, that really shows that this is the same Gus we saw in Breaking Bad. Even though he's not on the level he was in Breaking Bad, he's still very much pulling the strings in that way, is when he's talking to Hector's doctor, because as we know, Hector, he ends up in a wheelchair. He has and we now know how. It's because of Nacho's assassination attempt, and him now having this stroke and all that kind of stuff, and how it's left him the inability to speak, the inability to walk, and he has this talk with this doctor who says, like, I can keep working with him, he's gonna get better. But of course, Gus isn't just going to let that happen. He needs to make sure that Hector is someone that is always in the worst condition possible, that Hector is always someone that is significantly weaker than him. So he's going to make sure that he can, ride out this pain for as long as he needs to. He would rather see Hector suffer than see him get better, obviously. And I think that scene is maybe one of my favorite Gus scenes yet, when he's talking to the doctor and says, no, just let him, like, he's trying to rationalize why she should just continue letting Hector suffer. I thought was a very effective scene for sure, and it makes a lot more sense, despite the fact, obviously, we know what happened between Gus and Hector. That notwithstanding, we now have even more of a reason as to why Hector wanted to bring down Gus as much as he did, because Gus really is the reason why Hector is where he is, and I thought that was, and just seeing how much Gus is trying to belittle Hector, and how much he's trying to constantly use him in that way, I think it's just so well done, and I thought they did a really good job with that. But then, of course, you have the character of Nacho, who, I'm not gonna lie, I do not think is gonna make it by the end of this series. I really do think that Gus is at a point where he's ready to kill Nacho. I mean, Nacho just does not seem like a guy that's going to be able to stay loyal to Gus. And I mean, we know by when Breaking Bad starts, Nacho's no longer there. Victor is there, who's in Better Call Saul. Mike is there, that's in Better Call Saul. Some of Gus's other henchmen are still very much there. But of course, Nacho is not. Nacho is, considerably absent from Breaking Bad. So I really do think that's a good indication that Gus is going to get rid of Nacho very soon. I don't know when, but I feel like it's going to be soon, because just the way that Nacho is acting, the way that he's already cracking under pressure, I just do not think that this is going to work out very well for Nacho at all. And I think Nacho is probably the most interesting he's been this season, especially that whole shootout. I mean, that was straight up like a Breaking Bad sequence. I love the way that was done. But we're already seeing the effect it's having on Nacho, so I just don't see Nacho surviving throughout the end of this series, and I don't think that's going to work out for him. But again, I think this season, again, it still establishes that everything really is going Gus's way. He has all these characters wrapped around his finger, and you very much do see that here. And then, of course, the emergence of Lalo Salamanca, someone that is trying to take over Hector's work. This is a character that we've heard of before. I, read about this on a post about how when you first meet Saul in Breaking Bad, one of the first things he says to Walt and Jesse is, "I thought you were working for Lalo." So clearly this character has done some really awful shit, and is someone that is so bad that he completely scared Saul. Well, then he's Jimmy, then in Breaking Bad he's Saul, of course. But he's someone that I'm just wondering what exactly he could have done. What exactly is it that this character has done that completely scared Saul in that way? I mean, there's so many possibilities, and I think that the way they introduced him, they did a really good job. They didn't give him too much to do, but him, impersonating someone that is working for Gus to the character of Werner, I thought was a very effective scene, because you can see how easily manipulated that Werner really is, but also just how pure Werner really is. Werner is not the kind of guy that is manipulative in that way. He is a good person, and that is why it's so tragic what ends up happening to him in that way. And I guess we'll just get into it. Mike's whole plot line for this season, I thought was really well done. I liked where they had him, working at Madrigal with this, construction company, and I like that he strikes up this bond with Werner. These two actually seem to be really good friends, and how Werner is someone that is trying to stay very patient, and that's a really good contrast to someone like Mike, who, like I said, is heading in a very Walter White type direction, where he has almost completely stripped himself of his humanity in that way. I think the best example of that is when he's in that support group, and he doesn't even really want to talk about the grief he has for his son. He'd rather just kind of block it all out. He'd rather just move on from it and not really deal with it at all. It's better to just forget that it happened. It's better to just repress it from your memories and, move on than to actually have to grieve. And I think that is going to be the main thing that causes Mike's downfall. Obviously, the events of what happened at the end of the season, I think, are a good reason for that too, but I think that's going to be the main thing that really causes him to become where he is, once Breaking Bad starts, and I think we're really starting to see that here. And the friendship he starts with Werner, it's actually really sweet. You see these two have a really nice bond and things like that. And Werner's someone who, really does respect Mike. And because of that, Mike is trying to keep him on a leash. Mike is doing what he can to try to make sure that Werner is spared. Gus is already wavering, throughout this entire throughout this entire season. He just does not trust Werner at all. He feels like they need to get rid of him immediately. But I like that even at the very last second of the finale, Mike is still hesitant. He sees that Werner has a really nice relation with his wife, that he, was going to travel back to, wherever it was that he came from. He was in a good spot. He was not at all a bad guy, but of course, at the end of the day, he does in fact end up following Gus's orders, and when he kills Werner, it's absolutely devastating. You can tell, and that's what I'm talking about with the very subtle acting from Jonathan Banks, because a lesser actor, you wouldn't feel any emotion in that scene, but because we know how much Mike does actually care for Werner and the futile efforts that he's pulled off to try to save him, that's what makes that scene so much more devastating, and that's what's really going to pull Mike further into Gus's crosshairs, and we know he's going to be there for a very long time. He's not going to waver for a while, and I'm very scared to see what ends up happening in Season 5. I can't imagine the type of stuff Mike's going to be able to do, but, I mean, it makes sense because when you see Mike in Breaking Bad, it feels like a guy that has seen it all. He feels like a guy that isn't really afraid of anything. When he has the conversation with Walt about how, when he was a cop, he spared that one guy, and that you can't have any more half measures. Mike is starting to become closer to that person. He's not fully that person yet, but he's very much starting to become that way. And I think the show has done an excellent job of really showing just how significantly something like this is going to impact Mike. I suspect that he's going to have very deep regrets about killing Werner, because Werner was an innocent guy. He didn't really do anything wrong. He just was not doing what Gus wanted him to. And so because of that, that's why he had to die, and it's very devastating the way all of that went down. So Mike's transformation plus whatever the hell Lalo's gonna do is something I'm absolutely terrified about in Season 5, but it's something I think they pulled off excellently here, is just showing how much these characters are growing in that way, or deteriorating, and I really did love seeing that, even though it was very hard to watch for sure. And so, if that wasn't devastating enough, because I do feel that's probably the most, probably the darkest storyline of this season, the stuff with Jimmy and Kim isn't much better, because Jimmy and Kim throughout the season, they're just kind of, stuck as to where they are as characters, because Kim wants to help Jimmy. She wants to help him move past, Chuck's death, but it's pretty obvious from the beginning, this is not really affecting Jimmy in the way you would expect him to. He's not really grieving about what's happened. He honestly seems pretty content with the fact that Chuck died, and, I feel like a lesser show, similar to Mike, Jimmy would come off very unlikable here. Jimmy would come off as someone who is just kind of selfish and kind of sociopathic in that way. Which I would say his alias of Saul Goodman very much is. His alias of Saul Goodman is someone who is very sociopathic. His alias of Saul Goodman is someone who doesn't really seem to care much about people's feelings. He's easily able to, get himself out of any situation. But that's not who Jimmy is. And especially when we see the flashbacks with him and Chuck, they're not exactly happy ones. I mean, the happiest one we see of Chuck and Jimmy after Chuck has appointed Jimmy as, lawyer and things like that, and they've, they're singing karaoke, Chuck still takes the mic from Jimmy. It's a very subtle thing, but it still shows that Chuck was still someone who always wanted to be center of attention. He always wanted to believe that Jimmy was just playing second banana to him. He could never believe that Jimmy was better at anything. He was always had this perfection, and I think that's what made Chuck go insane in the way he did. I think that's what drove Chuck to madness. And I think we really do see that throughout this season. And because of all of that, it makes a lot of sense, that Jimmy just doesn't really seem to care all that much because he didn't have a good relationship with Chuck. He knows that this was kind of an inevitability, that eventually Chuck was going to drive himself to madness. And so I think where he ends up going does make a lot of sense for this character. And similar to Walt in Breaking Bad, Walt was someone who at first was a man of his morals. He had a very specific way of doing things until he just didn't anymore. He got too involved with the Heisenberg personality. And I think that's similar to what Jimmy is doing with Saul, and similar to how Walt really embraced his Heisenbergian sort of persona. That's what Jimmy is doing with Saul. He wants to be a lot more sleazy. He doesn't want to be as, he doesn't want to be as sympathetic to people. He wants to be able to fool everyone. And I think that's apparent when him and, when he and Kim, they do that whole scheme to try to help Huel, who, oh my god, it was so great to see Huel in this show. I love that we got to see him. Gail as well, we also got to see. It shows how close we are to the events of Breaking Bad at this point, and I think they're doing a really good job with that for sure. But when they're trying to, defend his innocence, he brings up the idea that he wants to keep doing this, but Kim is adamant about how, we're only going to do this to good people. We're not going to do this to criminals. But as we know, Jimmy's really starting to get close into that criminal underworld. He's going to get close to the Walter Whites and things like that. And of course, that leads to the ending of the season, when he gives that speech about Chuck. I do believe that a lot of what he says is very much true. I don't believe that he's just fooling everyone. I do think there was a time when Jimmy generally did believe that he always felt like he was the reason his brother became the way he was. But I think similar to Mike, it's easier for him to just block out everything that's happened, turn it all off, basically become as emotionless as possible, and just embrace Saul Goodman, erase everything, have no ties to the McGill name anymore, because that name has brought him nothing but sorrow. That name has brought him nothing but unhappy memories, and so that's why that scene, when he tells Kim that it's Saul Goodman, he starts to transform into Saul. That's why I think that scene is so tragic. It's not so much just because it's the thing that fully shows just how toxic of a relationship this has become, and also the moment where you can tell Kim knows that, he's kind of gone at this point. It really is Jimmy trying to abandon his family roots entirely. And I think the show has done a masterful job with taking someone like Saul, who in Breaking Bad is really just a comedic relief. He's there when we need some levity to the show, and show how dangerous this alter ego really was. Jimmy really is letting him win because it's just easier to. It's easier for him to become something that he's not, and become a lot more corrupt, do things that are a lot less clean, and that's not at all how Kim does things. Kim is a genuine person. She wants to do things in a genuine way. Yes, she will use these tactics if she wants to help a client, but she is still a genuine person, and Jimmy is not becoming that anymore. These two are not connecting on the same wavelength, and I think we very much do see that throughout this entire season, but especially in this scene. This is where Kim just realized just how far Jimmy has gone. This is the first time where she really did not, understand where he was coming from. She's backed him throughout this entire show, and this is really the first time where she's realizing, shit, I didn't realize any of this. How did I not realize this is what he was doing? How did he fool me like that? And so I don't think Kim's look is just one of disgust and one of utter confusion. I think she generally feels like she got played. I think she generally feels like she doesn't understand Jimmy anymore. And so it's going to put their relationship in a very sad place in season 5. I can't imagine where that's going to go, but I do believe that after season 5, I do think these two aren't going to be, I don't think these two are going to be together anymore. I think something is going to occur in season 5, and Kim's going to realize she has to leave Jimmy, because again, Kim is also noticeably absent, and a lot of people said, oh, maybe she's died and things like that. I don't think Kim dies. I think she's just going to leave Jimmy. I think Kim is going in a far different direction as a character, and I think season 4 really is the end, is the confirmation that things are not going to go well for these two characters at all, and I think it just, all of that is really what's going to send Jimmy down that dark path. And so, again, I think while this season is slower for sure, I think that's what makes this scene really pay off in the end, is that we knew we were going to get here eventually. We knew Jimmy was eventually going to get to that Saul Goodman personality, and now we're really starting to see him embrace that more, and how something that was once seen as something that was just lighthearted and fun is something that is far darker in that way. And I think that's something the show has handled so well, and I can't think of a spinoff that's done something like that any better, has completely transitioned, you know, the state of how we feel about a certain character, where, you know, we once viewed Saul as someone, like I said, that was just funny, but now it takes on a far darker meaning, and I think that really just shows how fantastic of a show this really is. So overall, guys, Better Call Saul Season 4 is another really fantastic season for the show. It edges these characters into far darker places. It features some of the best acting we've ever had. It definitely is the most depressing season for sure, but it also is, I think, really a transitional season in that it really is showing these characters becoming far closer to their Breaking Bad counterparts more than ever before, and I think that is something that it does just such a masterful job with. I can't wait to see where it's all going to go in Season 5, and so I'm definitely going to give Better Call Saul Season 4 overall in A. Look, I'll say this, guys. At this point, do I think the show is better than Breaking Bad? No, but it's coming pretty damn close. I mean, they're really doing an excellent job of just continuing to maintain the excellent quality the show has been on since Season 1, and I just cannot wait to see where they're going to go, you know, into the next season. But overall, guys, in my review of Better Call Saul Season 4, let me know what you guys saw this season overall, left your thoughts in. I do very much apologize for getting this review out so late. But as I said in my review of El Camino, I do plan on reviewing every single episode of Season 5 weekly. Definitely look forward to that. I will be reviewing the first 2 episodes very soon, and my review for episode 3 that airs tonight, that will be out later tomorrow as well, so definitely look forward to that. I've just really been very busy lately, and I have not had the time to review it till now, but that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoy it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.